A Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi everyone, it's Tim from the Sapphire Running Zone, and today we've got one of our event series. I'm delighted to welcome Tim Hutchings with us. Now, Tim is a very familiar voice if you're into your athletics, and he was a leading runner back in his day. Tim is going to tell us what it's like to be a commentator in the running environment. So not only does he do lots of track and field events, but he does commentate on a lot of marathons around the world. So welcome, Tim, and tell us how you got into the commentary gig.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, well, gosh, it goes back a long way. I mean, obviously, I was a good runner back in the 80s, so not the 80s, the 1980s. And very lucky I was part of the sort of co-crammer vet generation, I guess you could say, and an era where if you were struggling to get into British teams and you made a British team, you found yourself in the top 5 or 6 in the world because you've been sort of dragged along by athletes of that sort of caliber, those fellas. But when I finished in 1990-91, it was because of a hamstring injury. It had a couple of operations. They didn't work out. And that was after a massive soft tissue treatment to try and get rid of it. So I found myself in 91, about 31, 32. And it wasn't that my income had sort of dropped off a coalface, but I had a Reebok contract that ran for another couple of years. So anyway, Reebok took me on as a consultant, advising them on what athletes to sponsor, what events to sponsor. And around that time as well, I'd been doing a little bit of colour commentary, sort of backup commentary for ITV and Channel 4 and Eurosport, as it was then. And Eurosport was actually the sports channel for Sky back then. And obviously then they eventually set up Sky Sports. So Eurosport I worked with for a couple of years with Ian Darke and Stuart Story, and they were fabulous BBC-trained commentators who gave me a really good grounding in TV commentary, even though I was doing mostly colour backup commentary then as the sort of the analyst, the expert athlete's view, supporting them. And then the Eurosport name got bought by TF1 in Paris, or TF1, and and Sky set up their own sports channel. So they sort of got rid of the Eurosport brand. And I got invited to go with the Eurosport brand to Paris by Richard Russell, who was big in TV over here back then and actually went on to Formula One notoriety in television contracts and so on. And I ended up going to Paris for several years. We're flying there 25 or 30 times a year for programs. And this is when Eurosport, that brand, covered a massive athletics, loads of indoor athletics meetings, loads of summer athletics meetings, marathons around the place. So I was sort of thrown in the deep end. And from being a colour commentator under Stuart and Darke, who now, of course, is a pretty famous football commentator, I was suddenly told, right, you're now the commentator on athletics. So very quickly, I was given this massive opportunity, very fortuitously. You know, my brother's a lawyer. He followed that planned route from university through to law and an entire career. When you're a full-time runner and you've been a pro for 6, 8, 10 years and your career suddenly ends a bit unexpectedly because of injury, you're looking at the abyss a little bit. And I was very, very lucky to be given this lifeline of commentating.
Yeah, absolutely. When you get a commentary role, you're freelance. When you get a commentary role, how much notice do you get, and what are the next steps? So let's call it a marathon. You get a contract with a marathon to commentate on race day. How long in advance normally would you get that, and what criteria would they use to make selections?
Well, there's two versions. One is you get an email or a contact out of the cold saying, can you commentate in our race? And usually that's with a few months warning. But then the other version is my situation where I've been doing this for so long that the vast majority of the work I do through the year are gigs I've been working on for several years. So they sort of roll over, whether it's the Dubai Marathon or some of the events I do in India and so on. So those, I guess, you sort of know they're coming, and 99% sure they're coming, which is reassuring when you're a freelancer, because there are a few guarantees in the freelance world. And you start talking to the organisers or the hosts 3 or 4 months out, talking air tickets and logistics. They might send you a spreadsheet with their draft one of their elite field with a couple of months to go. But actually a lot of races, the majority of races, I would say road races, are putting their elite fields together even in the last few weeks. Marathons, they're getting dropouts and they've got a bit of money freed up, so they go to look for somebody else. So yeah, it varies, but usually 2 or 3 months out what's coming at you. And you need that for your diary anyway. Freelancing is bad enough when you get good months and bad months, but actually it's nice to have dates sort of nailed into your diary, like sort of posts in the road ahead, where you're going to be working for a weekend, earning a crust, and having those travel arrangements in place.
So would you do much research on the elite field, because that's your primary role, isn't it, on the day, really? You're talking about the elite race rather than the mass participation race.
Yeah, yeah. And, you go to a lot of these events, like the 4 I do every year in India. They are massive, great weekend festivals of running, or maybe one-day festivals of running with different distances. But they will send me the elite fields, as I said, drafts a few weeks beforehand, and then perhaps a couple of weeks beforehand, you'll get the final elite field. And even then, there may be small adjustments made. But I'm quite old-fashioned in the way I prep. I don't use a spreadsheet. I don't use Excel. I like to just do a Word document, and I type out their names and their personal bests and their age and their nationality. And then I might type out a lot of the basic information on their medals and achievements in athletics, their sort of objective achievements. And I would print that out, but leave some space to scribble in some notes. And you can then keep adding to it in the days before the race. But you end up having to have a final version ready, with a day or two before the race, with my typed out basic fundamentals of each athlete, and then scribbled in notes. I mean, I've got an example here, which was for a half marathon in the USA a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
And you can see where I've typed in stuff in the orange and then scribbled in notes below.
Yeah.
So it becomes a sort of hybrid mishmash of type and scribble notes. And, you go to pubs sometimes and you see somebody's notes from famous rugby matches or cricket matches or whatever, and this is my equivalent of that. It's not as grand as theirs. Nobody's going to put it on a pub wall, but it gets me by. And then, when you're at the event in the last 2 or 3 days, whether it's in Atlanta like I was 2 weeks ago, or Mumbai or Dubai or wherever it may be, you're there for 2 or 3 days. You can chat to the athletes and catch up with them and their agents, and if there's 1 or 2 coaches on site. So you gradually accumulate what is the finished hybrid version of your notes for the commentary.
Do you ask the athletes in advance, not just when you actually get there, but in advance for any information, or the agents for any information?
Not much, no. There's too much else going on, not forgetting that I work most weekends. So, if I'm away for a weekend commentating, get back on the Monday, sometimes the Tuesday, depending on how far away it is. You've then got admin to do to clear up that event, and then you're looking at the next event. Before you know it, the next weekend's on top of you. So there isn't a lot of time to be firing off emails to agents and athletes. You can go on social media and see what they're up to. But again, that's a lot of time invested. And I tend to rely upon that what I've described as my model of creating notes, which is typing out the basics and then scribbling down stuff as and when you can find it out. And actually, most races, let's say there's 20 or 25 elite men and 20 or 25 elite women. Your focus inevitably is on the top 8 or 10 names, and I'll have reasonable notes for those top 8 or 10, and then slightly less for the next half dozen, and so on. There simply aren't enough hours in the day to have a fabulous, great spread of information on every single athlete, especially if you look at them and you look at their CV, and you can be fairly sure they're not going to make the top half dozen in the race, which then means you're probably not going to see them much during the race on TV. So you have to pair your preparation according to what's expected. When you get messed around is when, of course, one of the back markers comes out and is in picture for a long time, and you've only got a couple of lines on them.
So what does race week look like for you then? When do you generally leave the UK to travel to a race? And what's the sort of process when you arrive before race day?
Yeah, I usually leave 3 or 4 days before the race, depending if it's long haul or not. If it's Europe, I quite often leave. If it's a Sunday race, I'll leave on the Friday. I don't like getting there on the day before the race, the Saturday, because then you're taking risks with travel being messed up, and you don't make it to the race, or you get there too late on the Saturday night when you've got a race the next morning. So I try to go to stuff in Europe and not too far away on the Friday. It's always nice to get there too, not last thing at night on the Friday, because you don't want to be getting there and wake up and there's a press conference the next morning, or you might have missed the press conference on the Friday with the elite athletes. So I just like to give myself plenty of time to bed into the hotel, get my bearings, find out where the course is, maybe even have a jog around the course or some of the course. I've got to that point in life where I don't like working under high pressure, so I try to get out to places relatively early. So if it's in Europe, I'll get out there on the Friday by lunchtime. If it's a bit further afield, like the gig in Atlanta, actually it was 3 weeks ago. I think I went down the Wednesday, was there by late Wednesday night. Thursday and Friday, attending press conferences, catching up with the organisers, chatting to a few athletes. And the race was on the Sunday morning. And I flew back on the Sunday night, actually, on the red eye, so overnight on the Sunday night. So I got back here pretty knackered on the Monday morning. But yeah, it's you cut the cloth accordingly, depending if it's a long-haul flight or if it's short, or if the organisers have been great to work with, or if it's been a little bit tough getting information out of them and so on. Most race organisers are really, really good to work with. I mean, happily, it's a good world, and we're all pulling in the same direction in that.
You talk about the press conferences. So you're actually running press conferences generally at these races?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, in Prague, over in Prague in 2 or 3 weeks, a half marathon, I'll be doing their press conference. Sometimes assisting with somebody else doing the press conference in the local language, and then I'll be, if not translating, at least doing a separate part of the press conference in English. And that's usually streamed. So yeah, I'm very happy, and I love working on press conferences. I used to host them for the London Marathon and the Chicago Marathon, and so on. Not for Berlin. In fact, I'm not sure I've hosted that many of the big ones in Europe, because obviously Berlin Marathon's in German and so on. Yeah, I'm quite happy hosting press conferences, sitting on a stage, chatting to somebody. Do it a lot in India. Do it for all their races, and it's usually a fairly straightforward process. It can sometimes be like getting blood from a stone, because athletes, when they become great runners, there's nothing in their DNA or in their personality that necessarily says, oh yeah, and they're wonderful entertainment on stage. In fact, a lot of distance runners, funnily enough, are very reclusive and fairly quiet and shy, and are an absolute nightmare to try and interview. And it is blood from a stone. And a lot of the East African kids, their English isn't great if they're Ethiopian. A lot of the Kenyan kids whisper or speak a very dialectic, clicky English. So you have to deal with all these things. And quite often I'll ask an athlete a question, and I get an answer back in English, and I don't understand what they've said. And I sort of nod sagely and ask the next question, and I hope the audience have understood it. The nightmare scenario is when somebody from the audience goes, I didn't understand that. Can you tell us what the answer was, Tim? And I'm going, I don't bloody know. So
I do remember a couple of your London Marathon press conferences that were distinctly one-way traffic, let's put it like this, because I think you were interviewing a number of people there that were more keen on one-word answers than you were keen to receive them.
yeah, and it is one of my great sources of frustration is where the agents haven't done sufficient work with the athletes and I could mention a few names. The agents haven't done sufficient work with the athletes to coax them and teach them to answer questions during a press conference. You are here as a great runner. They're paying you an awful lot of appearance money. You're going to get an awful lot of prize money. You can't just turn up and go yes, no at a press conference. You've got to give a little bit more. So I think while we're not asking them to stand up and do a tap dance and tell a few great jokes, actually just giving a little bit and making some effort with your responses, even if it's through an interpreter, which it often is, I think that is the minimum level they should try to reach. And I do get frustrated with some of the agents who just make no effort to really encourage their athletes to play ball. And yes, I've been a few, it's not like being a stand-up comedian and dying a death, but I've been in a few press conferences where people are desperately hard work and you just have to move on. And actually, I've got to the point now where I recognise after 2 or 3 questions, I'm just not going to get anything back, and you move on very quickly because it's just embarrassing for the athlete. They're uncomfortable. It's embarrassing for myself. The audience can see it's not happening, and you just move on as quick as you can.
Let's talk about race day. This is obviously pretty much always an early start, especially when we're talking about a marathon in a hot climate. What's average? Let's talk about the marathons as opposed to a track meet. What's a marathon race day look like for you?
Always a very, very early start. I mean, I frequently don't get a lot of sleep the night before the race. I tend to be sort of touching up my notes till after midnight, and sometimes you're up at 3, 4 a.m. In India, because we're on camera a lot, we're sort of commentating and presenting a show. You've got somebody knocking on your door at 4 a.m. with makeup trays, and they're coming in and trying to work miracles. But yeah, I mean, so Atlanta 3 weeks back for the Publix US Half Marathon Championships in Atlanta, we had to be on site at 4:30 a.m. Thankfully, it was within a couple of 100 meters of the hotel, the commentary box. And it was freezing cold. I mean, it was bitingly cold winds, freakishly cold winds. It was almost Siberian, and we're sitting out there for a couple of hours before we go on air. We were on air, I think, at about 7:30. So we've been out there for a couple of hours and more. And in that time, you're making sure your notes all make sense, checking the Wi-Fi so that your laptop's working during the program and you can be getting splits and dates and stuff off the timing system. Other sort of important information. Funnily enough, in Atlanta, we were exposed and our commentary position on some tables out in the open, and the wind was blowing our papers all over the place. So you're trying to nail down your papers or literally sellotape them to the desk. And of course, occasionally you miss a piece and it zips off into the distance and somebody has to go running after it for you. It's pretty nuts and bolts and basic sometimes commentating on TV. It's not all high tech. I've got a few colleagues who commentate off iPads or their laptop, but I can't. I think the vast majority of commentators like hard copy and stuff they can scribble on and so on. So yeah, it's usually an early start for road races. Most of them are early morning start. You do a rehearsal. You always rehearse the start 2 or 3 times, so you get comfortable with that start of the show. If it's live TV or being streamed, you've got to get it right. You've got to make it seem relatively smooth and relaxing and comfortable and welcome viewers on board. So you practice the opening 2 or 3 times, and then the rest of the show carries itself. You don't need to practice much more because the race coverage carries the program, so to speak, and you're going with the pictures.
Right, so do you know what pictures are coming next?
Yeah, you always get a running order. Always. 80% of the time you get a running order. You know what clips they're going to be dropping in about athletes, maybe 1 or 2 little interview clips or pictures about little clips about the various charities or superheroes that are running for different charities. You've got to throw to those. You've got to introduce them. You've got somebody counting in your ear telling you, okay, we're coming up with the so-and-so feature in 5, 4, 3. And so you start introducing it, and you've got to make sure you get your timing right and don't talk over the clip that then comes on. Yeah, so you're usually given a pretty good idea of the rollout and how it's going to be. And then you get studio guests coming in, having a chat with you in the studio, and they've got to get mic'd up during an ad break, for example. Sometimes you get a guest you're having a chat with on air and the producer's screaming, can you get them shut up? We're running late. We need to go to the next ad break. Can you get them shut up? Can you get them shut up? And it's a VIP, and they're chatting away merrily, and you're going like this under the desk, and they don't see you, and they're waffling away about something that has gone on for far too long, and you almost want to jab them in the leg with a pen. So yeah, you have uncomfortable, trying moments, but it's all part of the rich.
So you've always got earpiece headphones on at every event that you do.
Yeah. Usually an earpiece. I think in the States the other day it was headsets, which actually stopped our ears getting frostbite. But yes, and one problem is that the day before you quite often have a rehearsal, and the rehearsal circumstances or environment are very often different to race morning. Race morning, there's public address blaring away. Somebody might have unplugged something and plugged it back in. It's changed levels, and so you have to reset. Yeah, there's always challenges. You always have to expect the unexpected, if you know what I mean. And quite often it is a bit hairy. Sometimes they're trying to fix problems back in the truck full of wires with seconds to go. So it can get hairy.
You're not always outside. Are you in a commentary booth or little hut sometimes, or is it always outside?
Yeah, bless them. In India, for example, they build massive, great huts out of bamboo and planks and a studio that ends up looking brilliant. And they paint a backdrop or stick banners there and posters, a backdrop, sometimes a properly lit backdrop consisting of screens, some TV screens. So it depends on the budget of the event, I guess. But the majority of events I work on are very well organised. They've done it several times before, and it works. And actually, people don't want to see my ugly mug during the race. They want to see the race. They want to see the racing. They want to see the city. They want to know what's going on. They want to see all the colours and the celebration and the athletes running for charity. So the vast majority of my race commentaries are not of me. I'm not on screen, luckily for the viewers. The vast majority, it's our voices. Hello and welcome to wherever. What a beautiful sunny day it is here. Blah, blah, blah. And you want to make the viewer feel in the environment, give them as much location information as possible. Temperature, the winds, the time of day where you are, and paint the picture for them so it sets the scene.
And have you always got a co-commentator?
Yeah, 99% of the time there's 2 people. You need somebody to bounce off, have a discussion with, have a bit of a laugh with, create something that's entertaining. Might take the mickey out of each other, self-effacing stuff. And they might have a different perspective on what's on the screen. They might have spotted something you haven't seen, somebody falling over, or it absolutely helps to have 2 sets of eyes looking at the monitor, because obviously we're being fed pictures from out on the course. And
you're getting pictures from multiple cameras then, presumably, are you?
Yeah, there's usually a motorbike or a car with a camera on it, and those pictures are being beamed back to us. But that's the irony of road racing, is you can't, I'll fly to places and I'll be on site. But for a half marathon or a marathon, you can't be on site like you're in a stadium. In a stadium, you can see everything that's happening. But on the London Marathon, you can be in a box by the finish line. You're actually not on site. You're seeing pictures of what's going on 10, 12 miles away as the race unfolds. The only exception is in Japan now, they've got trucks for commentators that drive along in front of the lead runners with a sort of desk on the back of the truck facing backwards, facing the runners. And it's the most luxurious version, I guess, you can get, because they're sitting there driving along just 20, 50 yards in front of the athletes, commentating on them with their whole desk and all their paraphernalia moving along. So they are literally on site in a road race, but that's very rare.
Yeah. And what do you do for food and drink and just generally being looked after on the day there? Because you're there for a long time, aren't you?
Yeah, and that varies a lot. Very often that's forgotten. You can sit there for hours and not be given. You obviously take a couple of cereal bars and a bottle of water or whatever along. You have to, if you been at it a few years, you know that it may not arrive from any other quarter. So you bring your own food and drink, and then if you're lucky, people will bring you hot coffee and maybe even something to eat during an ad break, something like that. But we're quite often on air for 4, 5, 6 hours, and sometimes nothing arrives.
You'll do the elites, and then generally you'll then stay and cover some of the mass participation field as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I like to set the scene before a race. You want to see the elite start. You want to see pictures of joy and thousands of people crossing the start line, and then of course you focus upon the elite race usually with the coverage, occasionally flitting back to the masses or a reporter en route that you throw to who's interviewing somebody halfway along the route. And then when the race is over, you get interviews with the elite. You've got to throw to those, make sure those mix in with your coverage. Results captions come up, and it's been a lovely day here in Timbuktu, and it's been a fabulous day's race, and course record was set in both men's and women's races. The running continues. The thousands are still out there and will be for several hours yet. Lovely having you with us. Bye-bye. Sometimes, though, they say, yep, you're going to keep commentating on all these people jogging across the line for the next half hour. And you're thinking, why?
And you won't have any material for those people, presumably.
No, exactly. Occasionally you get a computer system whereby you've got a rolling feed of people crossing the line and you can mention the odd person. That's more the job of the public address announcer on the finish line. Cheer the odd person home and say how fantastic it is that they're running for so-and-so charity and etc. I think TV commentary, people don't want to sit there and just watch joggers pouring across the finish line for very long. They want to go and put the kettle on and go for a Sunday afternoon walk or whatever.
Yeah, indeed. So say it's a 9 o'clock start. You're finished by 12:30, 1 o'clock of commentary, and then what do you do? How do you wrap things up at that point? Are you involved in any of the technical side at that stage, or are you job done then and it's over to the tech?
We're pretty much job done. There's so many techies out there who are looking after all the wiring and the tubes and the connections and so on. It's always the sometimes the best words to hear are, okay, we're off air. Well done, everybody, great job. You just want to hear that in your ear. And it's like, you can stand down. Quite often, though, they say, right, we've got a highlight show that needs voicing in half an hour. Or they might say, well, look, so that was going out to so-and-so nation and their runner was 12th. And we've actually got some footage that we didn't put out on the main feed, but we've got some footage of their runner coming home in 12th across the line. Can you just voice it as live for their show, which is going out this evening? Because a lot of people taking the pictures and our commentary wouldn't necessarily have been putting it out live in Albania or whatever. They will have got that slab of coverage, say 4 hours worth of the race starting, our commentary and the race finishing and results captions and everything. And they will condense that down to a 55-minute highlights show for tonight in their country. And they might say, well, that's great, except our guy came 12th and we didn't see him cross the finish line. And so the people on site covering the race will say, well, actually, we have got some footage of him covering the line. It just didn't go into the show that Tim was commentating on. So after we go off air on the main live show, they'll say, right, Tim, can you commentate on this? Can you voice that? Can, the results caption, they need that again. So sometimes you're asked to do extra bits and pieces, and sometimes that can drag on. In the ideal situation, you go, fantastic, thanks. And you pack up your stuff, shake a few hands with the production crew around you, and head back to the hotel.
In the ideal world, you're then trying to go home on the Sunday night, but not always possible depending on time.
Not often. No, it was quite rare the other day in coming back from Atlanta that I flew home on the Sunday night. Normally you hang around afterwards, you're chatting to people. I don't like flying overnight anyway. It's and long hauls, overnight flights are, unless you can turn left when you get in the plane, which is always nice, but that doesn't happen very often. So no, I prefer daytime flights, and frequently actually I will be sitting around on the Sunday afternoon after a race somewhere in Europe, say, and I'm thinking I could be flying home this afternoon. This is actually quite nice. You stroll off and have a look at the town, have a beer or two, watch Brighton win again, and then fly home on the Monday morning. Yeah, as I say, I don't like to be rushed these days. I probably had more energy and more urgency to get home when I had young kids, and when I didn't have the desire to be a bit more cultured. I mean, sometimes I visit places now and I'm working there and I'm thinking I might never come back here, so I'm going to go and see that cathedral, or I'm going to go and see that museum, or I'm going to go and sit in that square and have a couple of cold ones.
But there's generally there's no press conferences on the Monday, are there? There might be interviews presumably with the winners, but that's not. Is that a formal press conference, or is that just local media?
No, very few races have a press conference on the Monday morning. I know the London Marathon always did, probably still does, and a few of the other world marathon majors, but the vast majority, no. In fact, in my experience, the majority of races fly the athletes out on the Sunday afternoon, evening.
Really?
Well, they're very conscious of the costs. The athletes are quite happy to get home. They've had their shower and they've had a couple of hours kip in the afternoon after their marathon. They want to get changed into their gear, go home gear, pack up their bags and fly off home. And, we're talking obviously about, in the vast majority of cases, a pack of Ethiopians and Kenyans. So it suits everybody that they leave on the Sunday afternoon or evening. And that's usually what happens. And then there's usually a small core team of us who are left on the Sunday evening who will have a few beers, maybe go out for a meal and discuss the coverage, discuss the racing, what was good, what was bad, what can be improved upon next year and so on. And then usually when I get home, I'll send the organizer a thank you and a sort of report with a few ideas and considered points about what was good and what wasn't.
Okay. What little entertaining bits? So this puts you on the spot a little bit. Have you got any stories that you could tell us about things that went horribly wrong on race day over the years that you look back on and think, "Oh my god"?
Well, the right answer should be no, because I've never had any disasters like that, and I'm struggling to think of anything where there's been an absolute disaster, and that's actually credit to the techies that are in charge of the production, who are looking after the signal from the bikes out in the course that are covering the race, or who are in charge of what's coming up on the screen, if it's captions, maps of the course, and so on. So no, I haven't actually. I feel like I'm a bit boring, letting you down in that respect, but actually, I would say 99.9% of productions, and I've probably done several thousand over the years, go very smoothly. People are professionals. They prepare well for these things. They set all the equipment up in place over several days before the event. They check signals. Sometimes it's line of sight between the lead vehicle with the camera on it and a helicopter up above, and then that signal is beamed from the helicopter back to where we are by line of sight. You can't have hills and forests and buildings and mountains in the way, but that all has to be checked. So quite often the day before, there's a lot of time sitting around while they're checking signals and everything is functioning okay. And if you're involved in that, you just have to bite your lip and sit there and wait while they're checking these signals. So no, and that's credits, as I say, to the production crews all over the world. They are pros and they've done it many, many times before. And it's a heck of a lot more complicated covering a marathon than covering a football match.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, what about instances of you touched on it before, that you might not always have the detailed research on every runner. You might focus on the top few. Have you had many circumstances of male or female runners coming into the top three, and you're thinking, who the hell is this person? I don't really know much about them. I mean, there are stories, obviously, of that famous one in Berlin a few years ago where a pacemaker was running down the home straight. I think it was with Kipchoge. No.
Or Turgat. I think it was Turgat.
So,
Yeah, Turgat just out sprinted him. Yeah.
you had many like that?
No, not really. It's fairly rare. I mean, I actually am a firm believer, for example, now that you allude to that instance, that pacemakers should have to drop out. I don't think it's fair that somebody can, halfway through the race or 2/3 of the way through the race, suddenly change identity and say to the bloke next to them they've been helping up to that point, by the way, I'm now a competitor.
Yeah.
The bloke's like, what do you mean? You've been a pacemaker 50 yards back. Now I'm racing against you? I don't think that is cricket, so to speak. So that sort of situation is very rare, where you get a pacemaker sprinting down the home straight against one of the competitors. Have there been many races where somebody's come from nowhere? The beauty is that you can go online, you see, while we're commentating and people are watching the race unfold. We're tapping away on our laptops trying to find stuff out about somebody. And if there's two of you, one of you can be waffling while the other's tapping away on the laptop, Googling, or other search engines are available, search engines. So no, we usually can accommodate any challenges like that. And actually, if it is somebody about whom you can find nothing and they come from nowhere, you just you speak very eloquently about what an unusual, remarkable, fantastic situation this is, and how brilliant that somebody can come from nowhere and do this, when actually behind the scenes you're going, all those reams I've got about these other people and we've hardly seen them. So yeah, it can be frustrating, but very, very occasionally.
Right. Okay. Now that was really interesting. Now we're going to do another podcast with you on where you've been so far this year, and we're going to do that on a sort of quarterly basis. Yeah, places you've been, places you're going, because you obviously have a very, very hectic schedule, and it's sort of bunched into certain times of year, isn't it? So we'll do that on another podcast, but really appreciate your time today, and look forward to stories from you in the future on some of these amazing places you get to go.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tim. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been, I'm very, very lucky. I'm very conscious of that, that I retired at 31 or something. Here I am more than twice that age, and I've got 30, 35 years of commentating and travel under my belt, and mixing with people who are of a like mind, who are all passionate about the sport of running and athletics. You fly places, do a lot of work, have a few beers and fly home, and hopefully a few weeks later a check arrives. So it's an incredibly privileged life compared with somebody who's got to work 9 to 5 and might not have the colourful elements to their lives that I do. I'm so grateful for the life I lead.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.